Okay. Okie dokies. So this is just the view from my deck yesterday. Start of the blue sky, more blue sky today, thank goodness. All right, so today our lesson is on the sun, and this image that you're looking at is the first ever image from the Inaua solar telescope at Haleakala in Maui. Now Haleakala, it's a volcano and it means the house of the sun. And this is what this massive telescope, it was in December 2019 that this image came through. And then this is just a blow up, and that's the whole image. And then they take this tiny little square and blow it up. And one tiny little chunk over here is the size of Texas. And that teeny little dot is the size of Manhattan Island in America. So our sun is pretty ginormous. And yeah, and MJ's just joined us, which is fabulous. Hi, MJ, if you could just mute. You haven't missed much. We've just started. We're just looking at the picture of the sun from the Daniel K. Inouye solar telescope. Just as an introduction, because this lecture is about the sun. All right, so our lesson outline, we've got basic planet symbolism and basic aspect symbolism, because if we don't have that, we're not going to be able to read our solar ingress chart. So we're going to quickly go through that. Then we're going to look at planetary phenomena, things like that we don't normally use as astrologers, as natal astrologers and so on. We're going to be looking at perigees, apogees, perihelions and aphelions. So all that counts, major planets going stationary, and we've got a whole list of symbolism there, and that's in the notes. That's why I asked you ladies to print your notes out and have it with, so that we can work through it together. And then we're going to look at actual planetary phenomena, and I'll also tell you, where one looks for all this stuff. Took me quite a bit of hunting on the internet. And then we're going to do the solar ingress. Now that's the actual start of weather astrology, the proper traditional weather astrology. Then we're going to look at sun-planet combos. We're going to look at solar eclipses, and that's it. All right, so here we go. We have got our planetary symbolism. Now, we'll start with the luminaries, our sun. Again, we do temperature, we do wind, we do moisture, and we do violence, like we did with the signs. So our sun, it's warm, wind is still, it's dry in terms of rain, and then violence, it brings lightning. Next is our moon. Our moon brings cool. She's the queen of the night. She brings breezes, and she is the wettest planet. So a big significator for rain. Right, onto our benefics. We've got Venus, our lesser benefic. She brings moderate, mild, and pleasant temperatures, mild breezes, and good rains. So the moon and Venus are the rain bringers. Then Jupiter is our greater benefic. It brings warm, pleasant temperatures. It brings pleasant breezes. And it's generally dryish, and it's considered good outdoor weather with provisos. And I'm just going to touch on them, but basically if Jupiter's in Pisces, then you won't get dryish weather. Then you're likely to get rainy weather. We will be doing a whole lesson on Jupiter. So for now, these are the very broad brush strokes, and just to get us starting somewhere. Right, onto our malefics. Mars is our lesser malefic. It brings very hot and extreme temperatures. It brings storm winds. It's dry in terms of rain, and it is a violent planet. Its adjective is turbulent. It's also the signature planet for droughts and fires. Saturn, our greater malefic, is cold and also temperature extremes. Wind-wise, it's usually still. However, during big storms, it can bring blizzards. Moisture-wise, extremely wet. It's part of the flood and snowstorm and hailstorm signatures. And its adjective is stormy, and that's part of the violence. Mercury, you know, that's our ambivalent planet. Generally, the temps are on the cold side. It is the planet for wind. It is a very windy planet, and moisture-wise, dry. Right, onto our invisibles, Uranus. So, you know, in traditional astrology, we consider all invisibles somewhat malefic. So Uranus, it's usually cold and it's sudden temperature changes. Windy, sudden, like gusts and squalls. So it's not that like wind that just blows for hours. No, it's like gusts that roll through and can be quite destructive. Moisture-wise, it's dry. It can be involved in cloud bursts, and with Saturn, it can bring hail because Saturn is the freeze, you know, and the wetness. It is a violent planet. It brings lightning. It brings erratic weather, and it can do electrical damage in the atmosphere and magnetic damage, you know, like the old days with radio waves. It could interrupt that. Right, Neptune, it's cool. Wind-wise, it's still, but there's poor. Think of that sea mist that we often associate with Neptune and the not seeing so clearly in natal. Here we have dust storms in wind-wise. Moisture-wise, we're looking at mists, we're looking at fog, raining unusual objects like when a wind passes over the sea, picks up frogs or fish or whatever, and it rains them out somewhere else. And it's generally with freak weather. So that's its adjective. Pluto, usually cool, also extreme temps, enduring wind. So now that's that pumping wind that like blows you over the street in Cape Town. It's destructive. Steady drizzle, but with Saturn, it brings sleet and cloud bursts, and it's it's considered the destructive planet weather-wise. Okay, aspects. In weather, we classify the aspects by conjunction, violent, and gentle. So conjunction also includes the parallel of declination. In weather, declination is fabulously informative, as you'll come to see. Conjunction, the most powerful, you assess it from the planet sign combo like you would do in your natal. Violent aspects are all the harm 08s, opposition, square, semi-square, sesquiquadrate, and the contraparallel of declination. That is, for instance, if one planet is at 15 degrees south of the equator and another planet is at 15 degrees north of the equator, that's called a contraparallel, and it's like an opposition. The parallel, they'd both be at 15 degrees south of the equator. Right. They disturb the atmosphere, especially if they've got conflicting planets, like a Mars-Saturn opposition. You've got hot and cold, wet and dry, and the opposition's violent. So you're going to expect some rough weather if those planets go angular or engage angles. Gentle, we're looking at sextiles and trines. They bring fair weather. However, if you have Uranus trining Saturn, it's not going to be fair weather because those malefics are going to overwhelm the gentle aspect. Okay. Righty-roo, we are onto the major planetary phenomenon. Okay, the one we all know, when the planets go stationary direct and stationary retrograde. Because what happens if that planet's sitting near an angle? It's going to be sitting there for a good long time, because especially those outers which move so very slowly. So it emphasizes that thing. It like puts it on steroids, is how I kind of see it. The celestial equator is at 0 degrees declination. Remember, we looked at that with the sun as it did the sinusoidal wave from the equinoxes, which are on the equator, up to the tropics, where it turns, which is the max declination. Okay, so we look at planets in the celestial equator. That's called a major phenomenon considered. Again, the tropics, maximum north or south declination for each planet. And if it's beyond the maximum declination of the sun, which is 23 degrees and 26 minutes, it's considered out of bounds. And again, it goes extreme. So it's also a bit of a steroid thing that happens there. Now, note that for the southern hemisphere, the cold polar air comes from the south because that's where the Antarctic is. And the warm, balmy air comes from the equator. It comes from the north. Because for us in most of the southern hemisphere, we are south of the equator. So the equator is north of us. Now the northern hemisphere is reversed. Their cold polar air comes from the north because that's where the North Pole is, or the Arctic. Same names for different names for the same thing. And when relative to them, the equator is in the south. And so like we build our house north facing to catch the sun in the northern hemisphere, they build their houses south facing to catch the sun. So that's the interesting part about weather, is that we consider the shape of the globe and whether we're in the north or the south. And you'll see all the lists. There's a north and the south, and I'll explain why. Okay, so resources for major planetary phenomenon, quite hard to come by because the heat, okay, I didn't even mention heliocentric and geocentric, but what I found is I found a Japanese astronomy, it's a Japanese university's astronomy website, and you can punch in your dates and you can run and you get most of the information needed. It's very helpful. They also have this lovely diagram to show the definitions of everything. So in the middle, we've got Earth in purple. There are the 4 quarters of the moon. And then the little turquoise dots are the inner planets. In other words, Mercury, Venus, and so on. And the pink are the outers. So that's Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And so just so you can see very clearly what is a conjunction, what is a superior conjunction, all the rest. I haven't really got into the elongations west and east, but certainly these other things and the quadratures, but everything else is quite fab. So I've given that to you in your notes. It's very helpful. And this is just how you punch it in. You pick what body you want to look at. You pick what phenomena you're after. So I was often after perihelions and aphelions. That's nearest. The peris are always closest. So perigee, G is the earth, geography and so on. Geo is earth. Helion is the sun. So the way I always remember it is A is away. So aphelion is away. Apogee is a furthest away. Okay. Right, there is a closest to Earth. So just to show you, and then what I've done, and I've put it in your notes, I've put, let's just have a look-see here. It's on page 7 of your notes. I've given you all the planetary phenomena for the year. Haven't got Mercury retrograde in here, and you'll see why when we get to lesson 4, because we actually use those dates to generate our charts that we need. But these are the big ones. So that what I've done, I don't want to put the whole year on here, you wouldn't read it. I've just put the season. So in September, we had Mars going furthest away from Earth. Today, actually, we have Venus closest to the sun. No, furthest from the sun, aphelion. Furthest to, on the 6th, we've got Pluto stationary direct. On the 11th, we've got Saturn stationary direct. On the 18th, we've got Jupiter stationary direct. And on the 20th, we've got Mercury at perihelion. So I've colored in the peris because they bring more of the emphasis. The aphelion tends to bring less. So, but it's good to note it anyway, because all these things work in waves. Now the perigee is when you do an opposition. So when Uranus is opposite Sun, then it is in perigee to Earth. So that's how you figure that one out. Yeah, that's November. December, we've got Neptune stationary direct. Mercury at aphelion, and Venus at greatest brilliancy. I don't know then what greatest brilliancy is, but I popped it in because I like that thing, because Venus is a very beautiful planet in the night sky. So what I want to do now is just in your notes, what I've got, go back a little bit to page 2. And for MJ, it's going to be page 4. So we've got major planetary phenomena and weather for the Southern Hemisphere. So what, and this is McCormack, he was so detailed. So for each planet, he puts the general effect if Mercury is stationary, or if it's at north declination, or if it's at maximum north or south, or if it's at apogee, perigee or perihelion. So like on the 20th of October, we've got Mercury at perihelion, and we are in spring. So what that does in general, we've got Mercury, it's wind, and it reflects the nature of any planets it aspects. So for spring, he talks about wind being variable. So that we can read from this phenomena. So we hold that in the back of our minds for this time that Mercury is perihelion. And for MJ is in autumn. So if we look on page 4, we've got colder wind and rain for that Mercury perihelion. And so that's how we've got all the planets listed. You can go and have a squizzy. You can go and look at Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter for spring. And if there isn't something for the seasons, then you just use a general one. But so very often he did everything by season, which is astonishing. You don't find that very often. Alrighty, so we are finally able to start our astrology proper. And so we're on page 8 of the notes. And basically what we do is we draw up a solar ingress chart. And once we've drawn it up, I'm going to hop into Solar Fire and do that for you. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at 50%. The 4th house is literally the ground beneath our feet, and that's 50%. The 1st house is terribly important because it's the place and the people, that's 25%. At the planet, which chart it is, like this is a sun planet, it's the solar ingress. So you take a note of what's happening with the sun, and then the last 12.5% is planets in the 7th and the 10th. In other words, the other 2 angles, and it's a basic, it's not as detailed as that first. And from all of this, you make a global assessment for the season, because it's the cardinal ingress of each season. And so here in the Southern Hemisphere, we are in spring, which means we are in Southern Tropical Aries for weather. And MJ in Halifax, she is in autumn, and so she is in Northern Tropical Libra. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to quickly go into my Solar Fire, and I'm going to reshare. Let me get my reshare. New share into Solar Fire. Okay, right. Can somebody just let me know if you guys can all see Solar Fire?
Perfect.
Fabulous. Thank you. Okay, super. So it's jolly easy to do this. If you're not using Solar Fire, you'll have to just find out how to do it. But basically what you do, just make sure before you start that you're on tropical and Placidus. That's what all the weather astrologers seem to use. So for now, we'll just keep on doing the Placidus houses. And tropical, we don't have a choice because there isn't a Southern Tropical. Yeah, and so we always have to start with tropical. All right, so we go chart, we go return and ingress. And then from here, we have to just make sure like 1 September is fine, 1 September 2021. I'm doing it for my location, which is Karatra. So you take the town closest to you. You could go nearest. And you can do natal or relocated as long as you've got the town that you, because if you look at the underlying chart, you must take natal. Otherwise, I've got Karatra sitting here under the search information, so I can go with relocated. The chart type to generate is advanced and ingress, and then you click options. Now here we want the sun ingressing, and we have to remember we're doing northern tropical, because tropical in weather is northern tropical. So we have to use the 0 Libra. Under here, we've got all the zeros of the signs. So we're going to use 0 Libra. We've got to pretend that we're in Halifax with MJ at the moment. And so we're going into 0. Well, the ingress is going to be 0 Libra on the equinox. Okay, and we can say the nearest return. Well, I don't think that even counts. I think it's going to take the return of the sun. Okay, yeah, nearest return is good. Yes. Okay, and then we go, okay. And voila, we should have Libra ingress of the sun on the 22nd of September 2021, Karatra, tropical, Placidus, and you test it by seeing that the sun is at 0 degrees 00 minutes. So we're good. Okay, and basically that is your solar ingress. So that's one of your assignments. You go home and you draw up your solar ingress for here. We're not going to read this off here now. We're going to hop back into the notes. So I'm going to go and do a reshare. And if someone can just let me know that we've gone back into our notes. Where is my slides? Here. My slides, share. And I have to go.
Yes.
Back. Oh, great. Thank you. That's super. We'll head back into the slideshow. Okay. Right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Brilliant. All right. So this is a thing I've marked up, just easier to learn. And I did the 180 degree user arc direction, just so that it's easier to read. When I do these charts for my weather folder for the season, I don't do user arc direct. I simply cross out all the signs and flip them, and it looks like a bomb. All right, so we've got Southern Tropical Cancer ingress of the sun here. This was 21 December 1980 in Laingsburg, South Africa. It was the ingress related to that gigantic flood that happened. So what we have to do, we have to cast our eyes down to the 4th house, because it's literally the ground beneath our feet. And in here we find Jupiter, we find Saturn, and we find Pluto. And that's where you use those basic lists that I've given you, the basic planets, the basic aspects, the basic signs, which came from lesson 1. So you keep those, you might have to reprint bits and pieces of your notes to keep as in a flip chart. So note that down. That's our 4th house. The cusp of that 4th house is Aries. So what do we know about Aries? Aries is hot and dry and violent. Okay. And then we've got Jupiter there. So Jupiter we know is warm, but it's sitting it's 1 degree, it's applying in 1 degree to Saturn, which we know is our stormy planet. And it's cold and it brings extremes and it's extremely wet. And we also have destructive Pluto in that house. So that's a warning sign. Okay. And then we must cast our eyes to the 1st house. And there we have Sagittarius on the cusp. Again, Sagittarius is warm and dry. So for the season at Laingsburg, we can say, because both of these cusps are warm and dry, we can say the season would be warm and dry. Okay, there was a flood, but before that flood, it had been baked dry. So that is correct. We could predict that. And you'll see that in your notes under the ingress notes. That's Carolyn Egan, who said if they've both got the same characteristics on the first and the fourth cusps, then you confidently can predict that for the season or for whatever period your little ingress, your whatever period map you're looking at. Ingress chart is valid until the following seasonal ingress into the next cardinal sign. So the next one would be for us in the south, it would be the ingress into the into autumn, because Cancer is our summer. So it's from cardinal to cardinal. Okay, it's roughly 90 odd days. I always run my activity reports for 100 just to cover everything. All right. So, and what do we find here? We found the moon here, and we know the moon's a rainy planet. Look, it's in Sagittarius. So, you know, that dries it up a bit, but still an angular moon. And then we must look at the sun. So the sun is in Cancer. Cancer is a rainy sign, and that's 12.5% of our assessment. And L4 is Mars. It's also in rainy Cancer. Here we've got the wind, Mercury and Gemini in the 7th, angular, Neptune freak weather, pretty close to that 7th cusp, nothing in the 10th. So, you know, what happened, and notice that Mars, the turbulent Mars, is applying in 1 degree to Pluto. So we must be alerted that something could happen here. We're not going to go into the Langsberg flood. I did that in the talk for the Cape Astrology Association, and we will look at big storm signatures later. But for now, this is how you must assess your own ingress chart. So here's another ingress chart. This was when the Cape storm happened in 2017. And so the storm happened, it hit the Cape coast on the 6th of June at about 10, 11 at night. And here are the angles. So the 4th house angle was Pisces, wet and cold and cool. And then the 1st house cusp was Sagittarius, which is warm and dry. So when the cusps don't agree, then you've got mixed weather, mixed temperatures. Now our solar ingress, it's the general climate for the season, but it's also specifically the temperature. There is, you know, you can fine tune the temperature on the lunar quarters, which we're coming to next lesson, but very definitely this is temperature. You must be able to get some kind of reading of your solar ingress chart. And the Lord of the 4th house is Jupiter, which is in the 5th house. So in Aries though, but yeah, it's not angular. And then in angular, we've got the moon applying very tightly to a conjunction with Saturn. So we've got the rainy moon applying to stormy Saturn. And then here in the 10th, we've got the sun in Libra. We've got Venus in Libra, that's rain. We've got Mercury in Libra, Libra's windy, Mercury's windy, and we've got Uranus in Libra. So we've got a pretty packed, although no, by the 5-degree rule, which you'd use for Placidus, Uranus is in the next house. So it's those 3 planets: wind, rain, and heat. So again, I have done the user arc direction just to make this thing look clean. Okay. So, and then you'd assess the sun as well. You also look at aspects and all that stuff. And like we said, you know, obviously you're going to look for conjunctions first, because those are the powerfuls. Here you can't see declination. We need another graph for that. And we will do that in the next lesson. we'll do the declination graph and read that. And yeah, so we've covered it. Fourth house, 50%, first house, 25%, the planet around which this chart centers, which is for solar ingress, always the sun, and then planets in the 7th and the 10th. And you've got the what to look for in your notes, the nature, the sign, the aspect, so on. Nature is the nature of the planet, the sign of the planet. What aspect does it make? The sign on the cusp ruler, and again, nature, sign, and aspect. So that's how you work that out. And then based on all those factors, now you've got to do, that's where the art comes in. Now you've got to say, for the season, it's a very general thing. In terms of when everything is going to happen, that comes in from the event lists. And for now, we are just going to do a very basic event list. The comprehensive event list comes in when we do the lunar quarters, because it's pointless doing one list here and one list there. Ask me, I've done it, I've tried it. It's, you've got to like flip backwards and forwards. So I put all the information in the lunar quarter, and only information that you can't put in there, I do the event list from SolarFire, and we're going to do that as well. I'll show you how to do that. Right, so this is just what I was saying. It's in your notes under solar ingress notes. If you've got hot signs on both the IC and the ascendant, IC fourth house cusp, hotter than average. Again, that's why I said to you guys, put your average season down, because when you make this global this like overall prediction, you've got to refer back, what's the temperature for spring. So if both signs are hot, then it's going to be hotter than average. If both signs are cold, we're going to say colder than average. Different signs, there's mixed temperatures. If there's strong connections between first and fourth, it increases the chance of that kind of weather. So if the Lord of the fourth is in the first, or the Lord of the first is in the fourth, and there's all this kind of neat tying up, you emphasize that planet. The chart as a whole, if the chart as a whole indicates good weather, then the temperature of that area will be favorable. If the chart as a whole indicates violent weather, and the hard aspects, when hard aspects to the angles from transiting violent planets happen, you're going to get violent events. Right, so more information here. In weather astrology, when we do our event reports, the sun is the day hand. So basically, if the sun aspects planets in your solar ingress, it's going to be on that day. If the moon aspects a planet in your solar ingress, especially first, 10th, or the angles, it's going to be at that hour. Now we use a 1 degree orb. So basically with the sun, we're talking 1 degree, 1 day before and 1 day after as a little window of when that could happen. With we're talking 1 hour before and 1 hour after. Now you can see for the outer planets, it's going to be a lot more than a day. And with Mars, you're looking at 3 days either side. With Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond, you're looking at least a month. And if they're stationary, longer. And that's why those stationary planets, when you see them, you take absolute notice, because I've often found that those stationary planets, 2 stationary planets are going to bracket a big event. So we've got 3 stationary planets in October. We've got, if we go look in that list that we've got, so we must keep a firm eye out for what is going to happen this month with those stationary planets. Because in between those lists, in between those dates, those 3 dates, something major could happen if it's meant to be for your area. So it's Pluto stationary direct on the 6th, Saturn is stationary direct on the 11th, and Jupiter stationary direct on the 18th. So with Mercury perihelion, which is important on the 20th, and that's windy old Mercury. So it's going to be an interesting month, I predict. So we must watch out for that kind of thing. Right. The decreasing importance. So first look for conjunctions. So what I do is I highlight those conjunctions first, because you don't want a million things. If you've got 20 conjunctions in your event list, then you don't have to bother with semi-squares or sesquiquadrates. Because you've got big bells going off, the rest is just going to be kind of like supporting act. Violent planets making violent aspects, you can expect violent weather where these planets are close to angles, and when they aspect planets in the solar ingress, fourth, first, or any angular houses, but fourth gets the priority. Fourth is big in weather astrology. And also the angles themselves. Benefics and gentle aspects. So we've got Venus sextiling the moon. We'll probably get some nice, gentle, good rain. All right. And here, this is just what I mentioned before with the orb, moon, an hour before and after, Mercury, Sun, and Venus, a day before and after, Mars, 3 days before and after, Jupiter out, at least a month. And Sun and Mars aspects, now this is the experts talking, they say you get stronger effects. So when Mars and Sun start aspecting things, take note. And when Mercury crosses the IC and there's fire indications around, it can ignite fire because air is what feeds fire. So that's something to look for. All right. Now we are going to flip back into my solar fire so that I can show you how to generate, and I'm going to reshare back into solar fire. There we go. Right. Can everybody see solar fire again?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So what we do, we've now got our Libra ingress of the sun, and we can go to transits, and this is what I'd recommend you set up. What I can do, I can take a screen capture and put it on the WhatsApp group or email it to people. But you want, what I do is I put the date, a fixed date, because like I know this is the 22nd of September, okay, for 100 days. And so you got to put that ingress start date in. And then you just want transits to radix, because all we're doing is we're going to look for aspects to the IC and the ascendant. So in this little file, all I've got is the ascendant and the IC. You can actually specify IC and not MC in solar fire. If you can only specify MC, all good. You're just looking for the opposition to the MC, and that's your IC. So that's that. The aspect pattern that I use for the transit, all the transiting planets I'm interested in. The aspect, I've created a special one. It's harm 08. Let me show you what's inside there. Conjunction, opposition, trine, square, sextile, square, and sesquiquadrate. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So it's a harm 8 with 6 and the trines. Okie doke. So that's, and you just go view. All right. So is this dynamic events report coming up, everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. And this you just simply print out. You can print it to PDF if you want, or you can print it to your printer. It's very easy to print to PDF. You just go into your setup and you tell it Microsoft print to PDF, and you'll get a PDF out of it. But I like to put these things in my file. I'd highly recommend that everybody prints it on paper. And so basically now what you're going to do is notice you've got tons and tons of moon. Okay, the moon's, because the moon's a mover and a shaker. Okay, she moves through that sky, but there she hits off the ascendant. So I'd take a highlighter and I'd highlight moon conjunct ascendant. Don't expect major great shakes with the moon because it's only an hour's influence. But here we go. There's a Mars sextile. Sextile, not the most fabulous thing, but you can note it down. So you have a good solid look at your planets beyond the moon. There was a sun as well. There was sun sextile the RC, Mars sextile the RC, but I'm looking for something a bit more dramatic. So let's have a squiz. Sun opposite ascendant, 30th of October. Right, highlight that. Now, you cast your eye along. Now, for MJ, she can use it as it is because this is the tropical zodiac. So for MJ, at 7 Scorpio, the transiting planet is at 7 Scorpio. The radix planet is, in other words, our solar ingress. Our ascendant is at 7 Taurus. But for us in the southern tropical zodiac, you just have to flip those two around. So it's super easy because it's an opposition, okay. But even if it was an opposition, you just say, what's the opposite of Scorpio? You cross that thing out and you put Taurus. And what's the opposite of Taurus? You cross that thing out and you put Scorpio. So that's a big one to notice. Here's a hard aspect, Venus to the IC, okay, 2nd of November. Saturn, and again, to get the sign of Venus, you cast your eye across. It's Sagittarius, so we know it's Gemini. Saturn square the ascendant. There's a big one, 10th of November. And for us in the Southern Hemisphere, that transiting Saturn is coming out of Leo. Mars, Venus, a Mercury opposed ascendant. Mars opposed ascendant. This 10th of November, this is a day to watch out for. Okay. And again, for us in the Southern Tropical, we just got to flip that to get where these transits are happening. 11th, Uranus square the RC. 18th, where we know we've got a stationary thing going on. Mars square the RC, and it's squaring it from Taurus. So when the planets don't, you can just go as far as dignity, domicile dignity, and exaltation dignity. And on the other hand, your fall and your detriment. Now, when the planets are in domicile and exaltation, they behave well and like we expect them to behave, like on our list. When they are in detriment or fall, they behave badly. So now it's a stormy Saturn in a bad mood. That's how I kind of see it in my head. So what is a stormy in a bad mood? They have temper tantrums and things. And even like if your Jupiter or your Venus is detrimented and fallen, yes, they're going to be good. They're going to try and do good weather, but they're going to be sulky and moody. So it's not going to be quite as nice as if they were in signs where they're beautifully dignified. Okay, that's why the signs are important. So that's the 18th. Here we've got a Mercury trining the IC on the 2nd of December. That's out of Gemini, wind, because we've got a wind planet and a wind sign. We can expect some winds. Now remember, this is for Karatra. So you're going to have slightly different ICs and slightly different ascendants. So you must go through your whole list. And we know, look, I've done it for 100 days, so you can find out where the sun ingresses into the next sign, the next cardinal, and just cut it off. I just put a line through the bottom bits. It'll probably be around about the 22nd. So all of that stuff after, not relevant here, but I like to have more rather than two, otherwise you miss bits and pieces. So and when your moon does hit the ascendant, so for moon, I would focus only on the conjunctions to start with, ascendant and IC, because it can bring rain at that hour for that 2-hour period. Okay, the hour before and the hour after of the moon hitting ascendant or IC, especially if that ascendant or IC is in a watery sign. Then we've got a watery moon. So it's a watery moon is naturally rainy, and it's going to be in a watery sign because it's conjunct at ascendant or IC. So we can expect rain. But, it's not storms. The storms come from those big, nasty planets, the turbulence of Mars, the storminess of Saturn, that kind of thing. Alrighty, so that's how we do that. And that's another of your assignments, is to go and draw up the aspects, the event lists for all the planets, transiting planets to the IC and the ascendant of your solar ingress chart. And really, we're just at the beginning, because next week, when we do the lunar quarters, there's 13 lunar quarters in a season. Now we start to get into the nitty-gritties, and you can see when the promise of that chart unfolds. So for now, we're still in the broad brushstrokes, but we're only on lesson 2. So we've got to take it step by step and get into it gradually. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to reshare back into my slides. Okay, if you can just let me know if everybody can see the slides again.
Yep, it's there.
Awesome.
Okay, full screen.
Great. So now this is another amazing McCormack production. Okay, he put signatures, and again, he did the signatures by season, which is phenomenal. Okay, hats off to the man. He did this for 40 years, and honestly, he did a fine job. And not only in the sun planet signature does he have the seasons, he also does it by aspect. So he puts in each season, the C is the conjunction, V is violent. And so like if we looked at the very first one on page 9, your Sun and Mercury in spring, for conjunction and violence, you're looking at strong wind, rain. If Mercury is retrograde, gale wind. If it's a gentle aspect between them, we're looking at fair weather and wind. And that is how he rolls for the whole thing. Now, notice in your notes on page 9, you've got your Southern Hemisphere combo signatures on page 9, 10, and 11. And then on page 11, down towards the lower third, you've got Sun planet combo signatures for the Northern Hemisphere. Now, the reason why he actually only produced for the Northern Hemisphere, but like I explained, in the Northern Hemisphere, the north is the frozen polar Arctic. So if weather comes from the north in the Northern Hemisphere, as I'm sure MJ will confirm, it's going to be pretty darn cold. If it comes from the south in the Northern Hemisphere, it's warmer weather coming from the equatorial part of the globe, and therefore it warms things up. So what I went and did is I went through all those signatures, and I also I like organizing things because I have a poor memory, so I need my notes on my extended memory. And so I organized it all very neatly, as neat as I could. Obviously, there's still room for improvement. But what I did is every time he said coming from the south, I changed it to north. So the north and south references had to be flipped. So the Northern Hemisphere combination signatures are from McCormack. The southern ones are the ones that I've flipped. And hopefully I haven't missed anything. So there we have it, so we in the Southern Hemisphere, we're going to be looking at spring on page 9 and 10 and 11, and MJ is going to be looking at autumn on page 11, 12, and 13. Now, McCormack did not do Pluto. So what we're going to have to do is start developing the signatures for Pluto. He didn't do Pluto at all. Carolyn Egan just did Pluto on a really global level as to when Pluto changed signs, and then she was considering that in terms of like overall weather, cold and whatnot. We'll look at that when we do the Pluto lecture, but we don't have signatures, sadly, not for any of the stuff. Anyway, in all these big storms that I've studied here in the Southern Hemisphere, generally Pluto has been in the picture. So I think we're going to find stuff for Pluto. So that's work in progress. Okay, so basically, yeah, it's all customized. Yeah, I basically mentioned everything that I've got on the screen here. All right, so that's what, there are signatures for all the combos. So as we do each planet, except maybe the moon, and I'll explain why when we do lesson 3. Right, the last thing that we're going to look at, so that's why, you know, I said make sure you have your notes, because I can't put all that on the screen and go through it. It'll just take too long and it'll be really boring. It's all there. McCormack, we stand on the shoulders of giants. There's McCormack, and he in turn stood on the shoulders of all those other people, all the way back to Aristotle. So, and probably the Mesopotamians who on whose shoulders Aristotle was standing. So, you know, hats off and great respect to all these giants of weather astrology. Right, now on to something interesting. McCormack, in his book, he mentioned solar eclipses. He said we are to take note of them. Carolyn Egan didn't. She felt it wasn't necessary. I was born on an eclipse. I was born on a full moon lunar eclipse. So I'm an eclipsey kind of person. So I've put them in. So what I've done, the list that's in your notes comes from Raphael, who that's a pseudonym for one of the astrologer guys. And now really this is from mundane astrology. Okay, so a lot of it, like, we don't want to know about afflicting trade and business unless we want to do mundane, because we're doing all the work for mundane. So it's a skip and a hop from here to doing basic mundane. Okay, I won't say like put your name up in lights, but I find it just pops out at me. So as you're watching the news and you're watching your weather, you know, and I'll show you techniques for tracking it around the globe as well. But not now, because this is a big lecture. So we'll come to tracking these things across. Basically, you just take your eclipse for London and then you draw it on the solar maps, like I showed you last time, and you see where that eclipse is angular on the RC, the MC, and the angle and the ascendant descendant, and you watch out for things to happen at that place. Earthquakes, political upheavals, all that kind of stuff. So when you go through the list, this is all I could find that was actually specifically weather. So the first decanate of Aries, so remember the decanates, they split 30 degrees into 10. So first is 0 to 10, then second decanate 10 to 20, third decanate is 20 to 30. So first decanate of Aries, inclination of the air to excessive drought. So if you've got a lot of planets, if you've got the eclipse in the first decanate of Aries, you're going to watch out for drought. First decanate of Cancer, great changes and weather alteration, so disruption. Second Cancer decanate, it dries up rivers and fountains. Libra first decanate corrupts the air. Pestilence, you see, like that's and scarcity and dearness of corn. So that's a knock-on effect of having the weather not right for the crops and causing pestilences. You know, that's probably the locusts that Phil Nelson was interested in. Aquarius second decanate, earthquakes and famine. The solar eclipse in Pisces first decanate dries up the rivers and makes the seacoast unfortunate. You know, probably like massive big waves and tides and things. Pisces second decanate, we're looking at tidal waves and inundations if the solar eclipse falls there. Now, I use little keywords for a solar eclipse, I use the word news. So that N is for new moon and S is for solar. And for lunar, I use the word full. F is for full moon and the last letter L is for lunar. That's how I remember it because I often get confused. Right. You also notice whether the eclipse is in fire, earth, water, human, or bestial signs, because that can also be put into it. Eclipses are forerunners of earthquakes, droughts, famines, floods, epidemics, political changes, and war. That's what McCormack wrote. Activation of the eclipse degree for 3 years after. So you note that degree, and when you see in your chart a big bunch up of planets on that degree, then know that they're sitting on a highly sensitive degree. And that's why I've given you an eclipse list. And then you can do an event report for transits just to the moon, because how do you get the transits to the eclipse? So I just figured out if we use the moon, because if it's a new moon, that's a solar eclipse, but the moon and the sun are together. And if it's a full moon and it's a lunar eclipse, that is the eclipse planet. So always just use transits to the moon for 3 years, and that gives you the eclipse degree, and so you can see what is going to activate that degree for the 3 years ahead. Timing of events is triggered by aspecting planets to the eclipse degree or the ruling planet, in other words, the eclipse lord. So you look and see if your eclipse is in Pisces, your eclipse lord is Jupiter. There's one exception. If your eclipse is in Pisces, let's just take it as a new moon, solar eclipse in Pisces, it's going to be ruled by Jupiter. But if Mars is sitting like within a degree or 2 of that new moon conjunction, then Mars becomes the eclipse lord. Or you can consider that Jupiter and Mars are the eclipse lord. That's just how it works with eclipses. You do a solar map for the eclipse chart. I just generally set that eclipse chart to London because that's kind of in the middle of the globe. I don't know, everything's in the middle of somewhere, but I just use London to see where in the world the sun and moon are angular. It actually doesn't matter in solar fire, but so it doesn't really matter. You can use any eclipse chart and map it on solar maps. You'll get the same answer. And then you can also use Nicholas Campion's Book of World Horoscopes, because at the back, he has got a list of all major national planets, national angles at the degree. So he goes from North Aries. Remember, this is all in the Northern Tropical. So you're going to have to use Northern Tropical information to check it up and then flip it, manually. So you can see, and like I've seen a few of these things. The June Saturn-Uranus square activated, I think it was 13 degrees, and I can't remember which sign, but Palestine and Israel were both activated, and that's when that Iron Dome and all that drama with missiles and rockets flying backwards and forth broke out around that big exact Saturn-Uranus. So that's just, but you can get the same with the eclipses. That book is excellent. It's a huge, big book, but hell of an interesting. And there you can see, now this is mundane astrology, but you can see how he layers the national charts. We've already got about 6 of them, I think. So, so here's your eclipse list. You're going to be looking for new moon if you're looking for solar eclipses. There's a date. One was on the 10th of Jan at 19 Gemini. It was a north node eclipse because the north node was on that conjunction. And it was an annular eclipse, so not as potent. The one on the 4th of December at 12 Sagittarius. Again, this is the NT zodiac, okay? It's a south node. South node is nastier than the north node. They're both nasty, but the south node is extra nasty. At 12 at North Sagittarius, it's a total solar eclipse. So we know we've got the last Saturn-Uranus square coming up, and we have this total solar eclipse earlier that month. So December is another month. We're going to have to have a good look at. And our assignment, I would like each person to do the solar ingress for your location. Events list for aspects to the IC and ascendant for 100 days from the 22nd of September. Look at any eclipses for the past 3 years. That's why I gave you all those years of eclipses in your notes, and see if any of the things in your solar ingress chart by conjunction, only use conjunction opposition for eclipses. See if anything is sitting on a sensitive degree. In the past, because you can go 3 years back. So go 3 years back and see if any of those things are sitting on a sensitive degree. And then going forward, see if any eclipse isn't going to trigger something in your solar ingress chart. And you're only looking for a degree or degree, max 2, quite tight orbs here, or very tight orbs, shall we say. I do a basic prediction for the general weather at your location following the guidelines. If it all feels a bit weird and Greek, that's what the WhatsApp group's about. I've also created a Facebook group, and then we carry on refining and testing as we go through all the lessons. So this is going to sit as part of our assignment, the location charts, because those are tricky. And that's it, end of lesson 2. So we can put our videos back on. And I'm going to stop the recording.